covering today's top boxing news.
And now it's time to discuss this weekend's middleweight matchup. A fight that will see two of the division's champions squaring off against each other for supremacy. We're talking about the fight between unified middleweight champion Canelo Alvarez and IBF champion Daniel Jacobs. Daniel Jacobs, who vigorously has been campaigning for this fight for some time. And it's a real treat. A fight of this caliber involving these kinds of fighters, you understand? These are two very good fighters, two very good champions. And a fight of this magnitude
as a pay-per-view event
would have undoubtedly
costed more than $10.
run me and you about $75 to see. In yesterday's boxing environment, a fight of this caliber, this quality, would have costed me and you something to the tune of $75. Whereas we get to see this thing for no more than
$10.
your DAZN subscription. $10 or $20 if you decided to subscribe after March 25th, I think it was. The point is that we're getting to see a fight of this caliber at a bargain. You understand? At what is a bargain. So you'll excuse me for saying that is cause for celebration, being able to see a fight this good for that low amount of money.
Get to the fight.
But we're not here to talk about what the fight costs or what the fight would have costed. We're here to talk about what we think is going to happen. That when these two guys step in a squared circle with each other, what is more likely than not to happen as a result of that? Does Daniel Jacobs have what it takes to unseat Canelo Alvarez? Or will this be yet another scalp, another major victory for Canelo Alvarez? What do we think is going to happen? Well, these are just my thoughts, you understand? You can feel free to disagree with what you hear in this video.
It's a free country.
But if you want to know what I think, and you're here so I'll assume that you do,
these are my thoughts.
This is what I think. Both of these guys got firepower. Both of these guys are strong punchers. One guy brings great defensibility, counter-punching, and a variety of punches overall that includes body work. One guy brings all those skills, all those physical attributes to the table. That guy would be Canelo Alvarez. And on Daniel Jacobs' end, he brings in a level of athleticism and punching power that not many middleweights in the division can call their own. Daniel Jacobs has serious firepower, serious artillery. This is not a guy that you can afford to stick your chin in the air and think nothing's gonna happen. But Daniel Jacobs is a bit more than just a power puncher. He's a bit more than just a guy with heavy hands. He brings more to the table than just concussive power. This is a guy that can fight from a variety of ranges, and he just so happens to be the bigger fighter in the fight. Understand that Daniel Jacobs has a height advantage over Canelo, a reach advantage over Canelo, and this opens certain doors of opportunity for him ahead of the fight. The question is he really going to be able to capitalize off of those opportunities? Daniel Jacobs being a guy who seems to be pretty fucking dangerous mid-range to inside, but also has the option of fighting the fight from the outside, it being that he's the taller fighter with the reach advantage. He doesn't have to be in Canelo's chest to get off his punches. The question is, what is he going to decide to do? You know, normally, I don't have a lot of stock in what fighters say ahead of a fight. Normally, I don't pay that too much attention because 9 times out of 10, they're just trying to sell the fight. They're just saying what they've got to say to make it an appealing event for the viewers at home and those in attendance. 9 times out of 10, I really don't pay too much mind to what a fighter says ahead of a fight. But in this fight, you'll notice that Daniel Jacobs has been adamant that he intends to knock Canelo Alvarez out. That's what he sees happening. That's what he means to do. And when he says it, I don't think it's just talk. I think he means it. I think he means it because of Canelo's reputation with the judges. I think he means it because of what happened in the Golovkin fight, a fight that Daniel Jacobs himself thought the judges should have scored for Gennady Golovkin, and yet it was scored a draw. I think that Daniel Jacobs knows ahead of this fight that he really can't leave it in the hands of the judges. Because look at what happened in the Mayweather fight. Mayweather goes out there, he dominates this kid, and one of the judges had the audacity to score the fight 114. And it's insane. It's one of the more brazen
instances,
quote-unquote, mishaps that I've ever seen when it comes to the sport of boxing and the sport of scoring professional fights. Daniel Jacobs is fully aware that he, if he has any real intention of winning this fight, he can't leave it in the hands of the judges. He's got to go out there and he's got to go for the gusto. He's got to go for the knockout. That if he stands any real chance of winning this fight, it's by taking it out of the hands of the judges and into his own. He's got to go for the knockout. The thing is that this being the sport of boxing, whenever you decide to go for the knockout, you simultaneously run the risk of being knocked out. Because in order for you to land that knockout, you're going to have to open up quite a bit. You're going to have to try to impose your will on the other guy. To get off that knockout punch that you think is going to seal the deal for you, you've got to open up. And that leaves you subject to what the other guy brings to the table. So when Daniel Jacobs says that he means to knock Canelo Alvarez out, I don't think he's just trying to sell a fight. I don't think he's just saying that to entice people to watch the fight. I genuinely believe that in his mind, he feels that's what he has to do. And I believe that's what he's going to try to do in the fight. Now, in the fight, at what range is Daniel Jacobs actually a knockout puncher? At what range? You know, what's his sweet spot to really get off those devastating punches that put a guy on his ass, that could put a guy out? What range is that? I'll tell you what range. It's mid-range. Mid-range where Daniel Jacobs would have to open up on Canelo Alvarez, impose his will on him to try to get a knockout. But it would be at mid-range. Daniel Jacobs really, he has the option of being a long-range fighter. He has that option. But if we're talking about
stopping the other guy,
where he's a knockout puncher, where do you see him score knockdowns? Where do you see him hit guys with shots that really hurt the other guy? That would be mid-range. That's where he caught Peter Quillen in the heat of an exchange. That's how he caught a knockdown on Maciej Sulecki. If Daniel Jacobs is a knockout puncher at a particular range, it would be mid-range. Now, at mid-range, Daniel Jacobs would effectively be entering what is also Canelo Alvarez's sweet spot. Canelo Alvarez being the smaller fighter in the fight, he would be tasked with having to close the gap on what is a taller fighter than himself. But if Daniel Jacobs means to knock Canelo Alvarez out, it's conceivable that he would have to do it from mid-range, in which case Canelo wouldn't have to work as hard to close the gap on Danny, because Danny would be coming forward, and so would Canelo. At which point, if both of these guys are mid-range at the same time, trying to get off their shots, trying to get off their combinations, Canelo Alvarez is the more compact puncher of the two. Canelo Alvarez throws the shorter, sharper shots of the two guys.
they're crisp.
And Danny being the taller fighter in the fight, it's conceivable that as Canelo Alvarez is stringing combinations together, we're going to see a variety of punches that go upstairs and downstairs at the same time, keeping the other guy guessing, keeping the other guy on his toes, unsure of what's going to come at him. I'm of the opinion that if Daniel Jacobs means to go for the knockout, he's going to try to do it mid-range, and in doing so, he's going to leave himself subject to Canelo Alvarez's quick counterpunching and combinations. Daniel Jacobs being the taller fighter in a fight, that much more of his midsection is going to be exposed to Canelo. Canelo, who happens to be a very accomplished body puncher. Canelo Alvarez, who in this fight is the shorter fighter with the lower center of gravity in the fight. It's going to be easier for Canelo to land devastating body shots that he can really drive, really put his weight behind on Daniel Jacobs, because Danny's the taller fighter. That much more of Danny's midsection is going to be exposed to Canelo. So don't be surprised if you see some devastating body shots. Don't be surprised. I'm expecting to see that. And honestly, even though, what I'm not expecting is that even though Daniel Jacobs does have the luxury of deciding to fight the fight from the outside, newsflash, you can't win a fight against Canelo Alvarez fighting the fight from the outside, being economic and getting full extension off your punches, hoping that you can keep Canelo out. You're not going to win the fight that way. It didn't work for Lara. Y'all remember the Lara fight. That's the kind of fight that he tried to fight. And we see what happened in that fight. Not a goddamn thing. You can't win the fight with Canelo fighting that way. You can alternate in spots to maybe slow the fight down, maybe compose yourself. Maybe you got hit with a shot, you didn't like how it felt, so you need to slow things down. You can alternate. But if you mean to knock Canelo Alvarez out, and just if you mean to win, then you can't fight the majority of the fight from the outside. So even though Daniel Jacobs does have that option, I don't think that the majority of the fight is going to be fought from the outside. One, because it didn't work for Lara, and two, because Daniel Jacobs says he means to knock Canelo Alvarez out. Well, you're not going to land that knockout shot fighting the fight from the outside. If you mean to knock this kid out, it's in the kill box. It's in the pocket. It's mid-range to inside. We think of the physicality of both of these fighters. You know, both of these guys, they've got their virtues. They both throw sharp punches. They're snappy, very good reflexes, good power behind those punches, good athleticism, good movement on the part of both guys. You know, they both got their virtues. Where Canelo Alvarez has great head and upper body movement, Daniel Jacobs has great athleticism and mobility. But one thing I'll say that Canelo has that Daniel Jacobs doesn't have, or at least not in my opinion, is Canelo Alvarez is a more durable guy. I think Canelo takes a better punch than Danny. You know, both of these guys fought Gennady Golovkin, and one guy got knocked on his ass, and one didn't. And the one that didn't, well, he just so happens to have fought Gennady Golovkin 2 times. Now, whether you thought he won or lost is besides the point, because what we're highlighting is that in those two fights that account for 24 rounds with one of the biggest punchers in the weight class, Canelo Alvarez answered the question as to what kind of punch, what can he take from a genuine, bona fide middleweight. Canelo Alvarez showed he's got some of the best punch resistance in the division. I don't think the same can be said for Daniel Jacobs. Moments in the Sergey Derevianchenko fight, some shots got through for Sergey, and you could see that they had an effect on Danny. You could see that they kind of knocked him off balance, wobbled him, frazzled him a bit. And that was with Sergey Derevianchenko, a guy who's a good, solid fighter, but he's not the caliber of a Canelo Alvarez. I'm of the opinion that Canelo Alvarez takes a better punch than Danny Jacobs. I'm of that opinion. And I'm of that opinion that if these guys are in the pocket at the same time in the heat of an exchange, not only will Canelo get off, but he will get off first. And if he gets off first on Daniel Jacobs, we might see knockdowns and we might see a knockout. Those things in mind, it's time to make a decision. It's time to pick the pony in the show that I think is going to let the paying public know who the best middleweight is the night of the fight. And the pony in the show that I'm going with is Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez can win, but not just win, but win by way of knockout. Here's why. Both of these fighters are riding high. Both of these fighters are supremely confident given what they're coming off of. Canelo Alvarez is supremely confident coming off of that last Golovkin fight and the subsequent fight he had with Rocky Fielding where he dispatched the much bigger man. Canelo Alvarez is riding high and he's really coming into his own. You understand? Something very similar can be said for Daniel Jacobs, who stands today as a bona fide middleweight champion who has just landed the fight that he's always wanted on the stage, the kind of a stage that he's always wanted. And I don't think that Daniel Jacobs is going to take his foot off the gas in this situation. I believe he's going to go for the gusto. I believe he's going to try to make a statement. But in doing so, I believe he's going to get clipped. Daniel Jacobs is an accomplished boxer and a knockout puncher. But ahead of a fight with Canelo Alvarez, who has the lower center of gravity, he's the shorter, stumpier guy. Canelo throws the shorter, sharper, more defensible punches, and it just so happens that he's a great counterpuncher. Daniel Jacobs not taking the best punch, and Canelo Alvarez being as good a counterpuncher as he is conceivable that he's gonna hit Danny with a punch that Danny doesn't see. And when he does, Danny not taking the best punch, it may result in a knockout. And I think that that's gonna happen sometime after the first quarter of the fight. Maybe in the mid-rounds, maybe round 7, round 8. But I'm going with Canelo Alvarez by way of knockout. Look forward to seeing what happens and whether I get it right or wrong. If I get it wrong, hey, fuck it. Everybody gets it wrong, but that's what I think is likelier than not to happen. Now, Canelo Alvarez being a pound-for-pound fighter ranked on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, a victory over Daniel Jacobs that would see Canelo Alvarez unifying 3 of the 4 world titles in the middleweight division would have to be reflected on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. So should Canelo Alvarez pull through and come out on top, he would ascend to the number 2 spot on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, bumping Vasyl Lomachenko down to number 3. If you're curious as to what the rhyme and the reason behind that is, it's simple. While Vasyl Lomachenko may have been a full-fledged world champion in one more weight class than Canelo Alvarez has, do realize that Canelo has fought more active champions overall. And we're not talking about champions from another weight class or a guy that used to be a champion, but he wasn't a champion at the time he fought Canelo. Canelo has, in fact, fought more champions than Vasyl Lomachenko.
How many?
Where Vasyl Lomachenko has fought 3 active champions. That means guys that had belts for him to win. Where he fought 3 active champions in Roman Martinez, Jorge Linares, and Jose Pedraza. Canelo Alvarez has faced Austin Trout, Miguel Cotto, Liam Smith, Gennady Golovkin, and if he's successful on Saturday night, Daniel Jacobs. That's 5 active reigning world champions to Vasyl Lomachenko's 3. Just as well, if Canelo Alvarez is successful on Saturday night, he's going to be holding 3 of the 4 major titles in his weight class to Vasyl Lomachenko, who's holding 2 of the 4 major titles in his weight class. They're both holding the Ring Magazine championships, so neither one can hold that over the other, but I reiterate, if Canelo wins, he's going to have 3 world titles via the alphabets to Vasyl Lomachenko's 2. So should Canelo Alvarez emerge victorious on Saturday night, he will ascend to the number 2 spot. But Vasyl Lomachenko's saving grace, his silver lining, is that as soon as he unifies a 3rd world title in the lightweight division, he could reclaim that number 2 spot. And given the movement in the lightweight division, it's conceivable that that could happen in the near future. So, that's his saving grace, that if he does get bumped down to number 3, he may not be down there for very long. He might go right back up to number 2, depending on what happens. Now, if by some chance, however unlikely or likely you guys think it is, but if by some chance Daniel Jacobs pulls the upset and unseats Canelo Alvarez, becoming the unified and Ring Magazine middleweight champion, if it happens that way, Canelo would be bumped off the list, and Daniel Jacobs would emerge in the number 4 spot, effectively being integrated into the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list's top 5 pound-for-pound fighters. It being that not only would he stand as a unified middleweight champion, but he would effectively become the lineal middleweight champion, having unseated not just the champion, not just the unified champion, but also a pound-for-pound fighter ranked on this same list. It would be quite a statement. It would be quite the upset. I mean, really think about it. It would be quite the upset if the Miracle Man pulled off this miracle. And if by some chance he does, the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list will reflect that in all its glory. So that is how the cookie may crumble, depending on just who the winner of the fight is. And those things in mind, the only thing left to do now is to batten down the hatches and buckle your safety belts, because I think we're in for one hell of a fight on Saturday night.